Have you ever reached a point where you thought, what's the point? You've been trying, you've been praying, you've been showing up, but nothing seems to be changing. The prayer still hasn't been answered. The opportunity still hasn't come. You're still fighting the same battle. And somewhere along the way, you didn't lose your faith. You just became tired. Maybe that's where you are right now. You still believe in God. You still love him, but you're discouraged. And if that's you, there's a story in the Bible you need to hear. It's the story of Elijah. In 1 Kings 18, Elijah experiences one of the greatest victories in the Old Testament. Israel had turned toward Baal. So Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. 2 altars are prepared. Elijah essentially says, the God who answers by fire, he is God. The prophets of Baal cry out for hours. Nothing happens. Then Elijah prays, and fire falls from heaven. The people fall to the ground crying, the Lord, he is God. Imagine being Elijah. You just watched God answer your prayer with fire from heaven. Surely you'd never struggle with discouragement again, right? But then Queen Jezebel threatens to kill him, and Elijah runs. The man who stood against hundreds of false prophets is suddenly terrified. He runs into the wilderness, sits underneath a tree, and says, I have had enough, Lord. This is Elijah, a prophet of God, a man who had witnessed miracles. Yet he reached a point where he said, I've had enough. Maybe you've said something similar. God, I'm tired. I've prayed for so long. Nothing is changing. I don't know how much more I have left. If that's you, notice what God does next. God doesn't lecture Elijah. He doesn't say, where's your faith? Elijah falls asleep, and God lets him sleep. Then an angel wakes him and says, get up and eat. There's food. There's water. Elijah eats, drinks, and sleeps again. Then God feeds him again. I love this part, because sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do when you're discouraged is rest, eat, sleep, breathe. We're physical beings. And sometimes exhaustion makes everything look hopeless. Maybe you're not losing faith. Maybe you're simply exhausted. Rest isn't quitting. Even Jesus withdrew from crowds. Even Jesus slept. You don't have to destroy yourself to prove you're faithful. Eventually, Elijah travels to Mount Horeb. And there, God asks, what are you doing here, Elijah? Elijah pours everything out. I've done everything I could. Israel has rejected you, and now they want to kill me too. In Elijah's mind, everything had failed. Then God tells him to stand on the mountain. A powerful wind comes, but God isn't in the wind. Then an earthquake. God isn't in the earthquake. Then fire. God isn't in the fire. And after the fire comes a gentle whisper. Elijah had seen God work through dramatic fire, but now God meets him in quietness. Sometimes we become discouraged because we're waiting for God to do something dramatic. We want the door to suddenly open, the prayer to suddenly be answered, the situation to suddenly change. We want fire from heaven. But sometimes God works through the whisper, quietly, slowly, behind the scenes. Seeds grow underground before anything appears above the soil. God may be working in places you cannot see yet. Then God corrects another lie Elijah believed. Elijah thought, I'm the only one left. But God tells him there are still 7,000 people in Israel who haven't bowed to Baal. Elijah couldn't see them, but they were there. His feelings told him everything has failed. Reality said God was still working. And that's one of the dangers of discouragement. Discouragement doesn't always lie about what happened. Sometimes it lies about what it means. You didn't get the job. Discouragement says you'll never succeed. Someone rejected you. Discouragement says nobody will ever want you. You failed again. Discouragement says you'll never change. Your prayer hasn't been answered. Discouragement says God isn't listening. But those conclusions aren't facts. They're interpretations formed while you're hurting. That's why Galatians 6:9 says, let us not become weary in doing good. For at the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Notice, the Bible doesn't pretend Christians never get tired. You can be faithful and tired. You can trust God and feel discouraged. The command is simply don't give up. Because there's a difference between resting and quitting. Think about Joseph. Imagine judging his life while he was sitting in prison. God has forgotten him. but the story wasn't finished. Think about David hiding from Saul. He'll never become king, but the story wasn't finished. Think about the disciples after Jesus was crucified. Their Messiah was dead. Everything looked over, but the story wasn't finished. Sunday was coming, and maybe that's what you need to hear today. Your story isn't finished either. You don't know what God is doing with this season. You don't know which conversation is coming, which door will open, which person you'll meet. And I can't promise everything you're hoping for will happen exactly how you want. The Bible doesn't promise that. But God's faithfulness isn't determined by whether today went according to your plan. So what should you do when you're discouraged? First, rest. Don't make permanent decisions from temporary exhaustion. Second, tell God how you actually feel. You don't need to impress him. He already knows. Third, question the story discouragement is telling you. Has God really abandoned you? Or are you judging the entire story from one difficult chapter? And finally, take the next step. Not the next 100, just one. Send one application. Have one conversation. Say one prayer. Read one chapter. Try one more time. Get through today. Then, tomorrow, take another step. Because sometimes faith doesn't look like confidently running toward the future. Sometimes faith looks like whispering, God, I don't feel strong anymore, but I'm still here. And maybe that's enough for today. Elijah thought he was finished. God wasn't finished with him. Peter thought his failure had disqualified him. Jesus restored him. The disciples thought the cross was the end. Then came resurrection. So if you're discouraged right now, rest if you need to. Cry if you need to. Ask for help if you need to. But don't surrender your hope. Galatians says, at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. You may not see anything growing yet, but that doesn't mean nothing is happening beneath the soil. If this message found you at the right time, comment, I'm not giving up. And if you know someone who's discouraged, send this video to them. If you like more biblical encouragement for those moments when faith feels difficult, consider subscribing to Quiet Momentum. And remember, you may be tired. You may be disappointed. You may not understand what God is doing. But one difficult chapter doesn't determine how the story ends. Don't give up yet. God isn't finished.